At my own wedding, my mother-in-law publicly demanded that I hand over my entire $9,700 paycheck and all future bonuses. Refuse, and walk out of this wedding. My wife said nothing. I didn't argue or cause a scene, I walked out. What happened after that decision exposed a truth their family never expected to come out. Before I tell you how that single moment unraveled everything, do me a small favor. Let me know you're here, drop a quick hello or tell me where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. It helps stories like this reach the people who might need them. Now let me take you back to how it all really began. The Aurora Grand Hall looked flawless that evening. Crystal chandeliers hung low, scattering warm light across polished marble floors. Soft jazz floated through the air, and nearly 200 guests filled the room, business associates, extended relatives, people who spoke carefully and dressed like nothing in life ever surprised them. From the outside, it was the perfect wedding. I stood at the front of the room in a tailored suit that still felt unfamiliar on my shoulders. My name is Ethan Cole, and I'd never been the kind of man who belonged in rooms like this. I worked in civil infrastructure across North Valley, long days on construction sites, building bridges no one noticed unless they failed. I believed in showing up, doing the work, and earning respect quietly. Beside me stood Marissa Hale, my bride. She looked stunning, calm, composed, almost untouchable. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything we'd struggled through to get here had been worth it. That once we were officially married, the tension that always followed her family would finally loosen its grip. The ceremony ended. Applause echoed through the hall. Glasses clinked. The band shifted into a smooth, celebratory rhythm. Someone pressed a microphone into my hand so I could thank the guests. I smiled, took one breath, and before I could speak, Veronica Hale, my mother-in-law, stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She lifted her champagne glass with practiced confidence, the kind that comes from a lifetime of never being challenged. The MC assumed she was about to offer a toast and handed her the microphone without a second thought. The music faded. The room quieted. And then she spoke. From now on, she said evenly, you will give up your entire $9,700 pay and all future bonuses. Refuse, and walk out of this wedding. For a split second, my mind refused to process the words. It felt like the room tilted slightly, like I'd missed a step on a staircase that wasn't there. Forks froze midair. Someone near the back let out a nervous laugh that died instantly when Veronica didn't smile. I turned slowly toward Marissa. She didn't look at me. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her dress. Her eyes stayed forward. She didn't object. She didn't question it. She didn't even flinch. That silence was louder than anything Veronica had said. Around us, phones began to rise discreetly. The photographer lowered his camera, unsure if he was witnessing a private family moment or something no one would be able to forget. Richard Hale, my father-in-law, gave a small approving nod. Lucas Hale, Marissa's brother, leaned back in his chair with a smirk he didn't bother hiding. I felt the microphone grow heavy in my hand. For months leading up to the wedding, I'd sensed something was wrong. The Hales talked about family systems and shared responsibility the way other families talked about love. During dinners at their estate in Silver Ridge Heights, questions about my income always came disguised as concern. How stable is your pay? Do bonuses fluctuate? Wouldn't it be easier if everything went through one account? They called it unity. I'd felt it was control. I looked back at Veronica. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was satisfied, like she'd just finalized a contract. I could have argued. I could have asked Marissa to speak. I could have turned it into a scene. Instead, I remembered my father. Thomas Cole had raised me alone after my mother passed. He never cared about appearances. He cared about dignity. Once, when I was a teenager, he told me, if someone tries to own your voice, you don't fight louder. You walk away and let the silence speak. So that's what I did. I placed the microphone gently back onto the stand. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs slowly enough that the room had time to understand what was happening. Then I turned around. Gasps rippled through the hall as I walked down the aisle alone. Someone clapped awkwardly, thinking it was part of the ceremony. Others whispered. Veronica's voice followed me sharp and controlled. Don't do something you'll regret, Ethan. I didn't turn back. My father stood from the back row and fell into step beside me without a word. His presence grounded me in a way nothing else could. The heavy doors of the venue closed behind us, muting the music, the voices, the spectacle. Outside, cold evening air hit my face like truth. Snow dusted the parking lot, and my truck sat near the entrance, exactly where I'd parked it that morning thinking I'd leave married. My father didn't ask questions. He never did when it mattered most. You okay? He asked quietly. I nodded once. I will be. We drove away without looking back. Inside that glowing hall, they were probably already rewriting the story, turning my silence into weakness, my departure into failure. But as the tires crunched against the frozen road, something inside me felt unexpectedly steady. I didn't know it yet, but walking away from that wedding had just set something much bigger in motion. And a few hours later, when my phone rang in a quiet roadside motel, I would finally understand what Veronica Hale never anticipated. That control only works until the truth gets involved. The motel room smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. One of the lamps flickered when I turned it on, casting uneven light across the narrow space. My father took the chair by the window without removing his coat, like he wasn't planning to stay long. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, staring at my phone as if it might explain everything that had just happened. Neither of us spoke for a while. Walking out of the wedding hadn't felt dramatic in the moment. It had felt necessary. But now, in the quiet aftermath, the weight of it pressed down hard. I had just left my bride at the altar. I had walked away from a future I thought I understood. And I had done it in front of 200 people who would all have their own version of the story by morning. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. Unknown number. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, then let it ring out. Whoever it was could wait. I wasn't ready yet. My father finally broke the silence. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, still looking out the window. "I know," I replied. Then, more honestly, I just didn't expect it to happen like that. He nodded slowly. "People like that don't ask. They announce." That sentence stuck with me. Another vibration. Same number. This time, I answered. "Ethan Cole," a calm male voice said. "My name is Nathan Crow. I'm calling because what happened tonight didn't start tonight." I sat up straighter. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been watching the Hale family for a long time," he said. "And someone your mother-in-law tried to call for help less than an hour ago." I glanced at my father. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not interested in her problems," I said. "I figured," Nathan replied. "That's why I'm calling you instead." There was a pause, deliberate, measured. "You walked away when most people would have folded," he continued. "That matters." "I didn't walk away to make a point," I said. "I walked away because I wasn't going to sign my life over in public." Nathan gave a quiet chuckle. "Exactly. Listen carefully, Ethan. Tomorrow morning, there's an emergency meeting at Hale Consolidated. Your mother-in-law is losing control of something she's been hiding for years, and she thinks you're the weak link she can still pull." "I don't work for them," I said flatly. "No," he agreed. "But your name is already on documents you've never seen." That made my stomach drop. "What kind of documents?" "Ones that assume your income, your labor, and your silence," Nathan said. "I'll explain everything in person. Be at the Hale offices at 9. Bring your father. You're going to want him there." Before I could respond, the call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. My father turned from the window. That sounded serious. "It sounded like I was already part of something I never agreed to," I said. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Veronica's face, calm, satisfied, certain. I saw Marissa standing beside her, silent, unmoving. And I kept hearing that sentence echo in my head: refuse, and walk out of this wedding. By morning, the snow had stopped. Silveridge looked deceptively clean, like nothing ugly had happened beneath its polished surface. The Hale offices occupied the top floors of a glass tower overlooking the city. When we arrived, the lobby was already buzzing with tension. Phones rang nonstop. Assistants whispered urgently. A digital screen flashed market updates in red and green. Nathan Crow met us at the elevator. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, with sharp eyes and a composed demeanor that suggested he'd seen worse storms than this. He shook my father's hand first, a detail I noticed. "Mr. Cole," he said respectfully. "Thank you for raising a man who knows when to walk." My father nodded once. He taught himself the hard parts. The boardroom was all glass and steel. Veronica sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, pearls perfectly aligned as if presentation alone could hold the room together. Richard sat beside her, jaw tight. Lucas fidgeted with his cufflinks, eyes darting between the door and his phone. Marissa sat a few seats down. She looked smaller than I remembered from the night before. Nathan took his place at the opposite end of the table and gestured for me to sit beside him. Veronica's eyes locked onto me instantly. "You had no right to bring this into my company," she snapped. Nathan didn't look at her. "Actually, Veronica, you brought this into your company the moment you decided to turn a wedding into a contract negotiation." He tapped a tablet, and the screen behind him lit up. The first video played without sound at first. Then her voice filled the room. "From now on, you will give up your entire pay and all future bonuses." The clip froze. Nathan tapped again. Another recording began. Grainier. Shot on a phone. Veronica's voice again, sharp and calculating. Once he signs, Lucas's situation stabilizes. The wedding makes it look voluntary. Lucas went pale. What situation? Richard demanded, turning on his son. Nathan slid a folder across the table. Gambling debts. Misappropriated funds. And a plan to cover them using your son-in-law's income stream. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This hadn't been about tradition. It had been about plugging a leak. Veronica stood abruptly. This is manipulated. Taken out of context. Nathan met her gaze calmly. Context doesn't change intent. He turned to me. Ethan, your name was already attached to a family contribution agreement. Monthly transfers. Automatic escalations. Bonuses included. You were never meant to say yes or no. You were meant to comply. I looked at Marissa. She finally met my eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she still didn't speak. That hurt more than everything else combined. Nathan closed the folder. As of this morning, my firm has withdrawn all investment support from Hale Consolidated. Regulators have been notified. The board will decide what happens next. The room erupted. Veronica shouted. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Lucas swore under his breath. I stood slowly. I didn't come here to take anything, I said quietly. I came to understand why you thought you could take from me. No one answered. I turned and walked out again, this time without hesitation. In the hallway, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. Proud of you, he said softly. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware of the collapse happening behind glass walls. I realized then that the wedding hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the moment I stopped being convenient. And that was only the beginning. By the time we stepped out of the Hale Tower, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath. News vans were already lining the curb across the street, reporters speaking into cameras with urgent expressions. Someone had leaked the meeting faster than I expected. Nathan walked with us to the elevator lobby. This won't calm down, he said evenly. Once a story like this cracks open, it keeps splitting. I didn't ask for a public spectacle, I replied. I know, he said. But you didn't cause it either. You just refused to absorb it. That distinction mattered more than I realized at the time. My father and I drove back toward North Valley in silence. Snow still clung to the edges of the road, melting slowly under the pale morning sun. I watched the landscape roll by, bridges, overpasses, things I'd helped build with my own hands. Structures that carried weight without complaint. That night, my phone didn't stop ringing. Friends from the wedding. Distant relatives. Coworkers who had seen the video online. Strangers who felt entitled to an opinion about a marriage they'd never lived inside. I ignored most of it. Around midnight, one call finally broke through. Marissa. I let it ring twice before answering. Ethan, she said, her voice thin. Please don't hang up. I'm not, I replied. I'm listening. There was a long pause, filled only by her breathing. She didn't mean it like that, she finally said. I closed my eyes. Marissa, I said slowly, she demanded my paycheck in front of 200 people. Tell me what other way that could possibly mean. She was panicking, Marissa insisted. Lucas is in trouble. My dad didn't tell you everything. There were debts. She thought if we were married, it would stabilize things. So I was the solution, I said. Not your partner. Not your husband. A financial patch. That's not fair, she whispered. No, I replied quietly. It's accurate. She began to cry then, the sound raw and unguarded. I didn't know how to stop her. That's the problem, I said. You didn't even try. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was final. I need time, she said. So do I replied. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, letting the truth settle where denial used to live. Love hadn't failed because of money. It had failed because silence had been chosen over honesty, again and again. The next few weeks unfolded like controlled demolition. Hale Consolidated stock slid steadily. Board members resigned. Regulators launched formal investigations into fund mismanagement. Lucas's debt surfaced publicly, dragging every hidden transaction into the light. Veronica disappeared from public view. Nathan checked in occasionally, not to steer, but to inform. You're not listed on any of the documents anymore, he told me one afternoon. Your refusal forced them to rewrite everything. That's rare. I didn't plan to be rare, I said. He smiled faintly. You don't have to. Integrity does that on its own. Meanwhile, my life simplified in unexpected ways. I moved back into my old apartment near the river, the one I'd planned to sell after the wedding. I returned to work full-time on a regional bridge project that had stalled due to budget disputes. It felt good to solve problems that had clear answers, measurements, materials, timelines. Things that didn't ask you to betray yourself to fit. One evening, my father stopped by with takeout and a quiet smile. "You've been getting calls," he said, setting the food down. "I let them go to voicemail," I replied. "Good," he said. "People who want control don't like unanswered phones." He wasn't wrong. A week later, a letter arrived from Marissa. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. She wrote about growing up inside her mother's expectations. About how silence had been her survival skill long before she met me. About how she'd mistaken obedience for peace. She didn't ask me to come back. She asked me to forgive her. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, I knew, wasn't something you rushed. It had to arrive honestly, or not at all. Spring came early that year. Snow melted off the riverbanks, and construction resumed at a pace that reminded me why I loved the work in the first place. You build something strong enough, and people cross it without ever knowing your name. One afternoon, Nathan showed up at the site unannounced. He stood at the edge of the temporary walkway, watching the crew work. "You're good at this," he said. "I've been doing it a long time," I replied. He nodded. "That's why I'm here." He told me his firm was backing out of speculative investments and moving toward long-term infrastructure partnerships. Not flashy. Not fast. But solid. "I want you involved," he said. "Not because of what you walked away from, but because of how you did it." I didn't answer right away. The wind picked up over the river, carrying the scent of wet steel and fresh concrete. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I stood alone on the bridge as the sun dipped below the horizon. The structure held firm beneath my boots, steady and uncomplaining. I realized then that walking out of the wedding hadn't cost me my future. It had stripped away everything that wasn't real. And somewhere inside that loss, something solid had finally begun to take shape. The first real consequence arrived quietly. Not through the news. Not through lawyers or phone calls. Through absence. Hale Consolidated stopped fighting. The threats vanished. The public statement softened. The once confident language of misunderstanding and temporary optics dissolved into silence. When an empire stops talking, it's because it's counting losses instead of allies. Nathan called me late one evening. "The board voted," he said. "Veronica stepped down effective immediately." I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt relief, like a pressure valve finally released after years of being tightened too far. "And Marissa?" I asked. "She wasn't offered a seat," he replied. "Or protection." That answer stayed with me longer than I expected. A week later, she showed up. No warning. No call. I opened the door and found her standing there with a small suitcase and tired eyes. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Just human. "I'm not here to fix things," she said before I could speak. I just didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside and let her in. She looked around the apartment slowly, like someone seeing a familiar place stripped of illusion. No wedding gifts. No shared plans. Just a man who had chosen himself, and lived with the cost. "They're blaming me," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Not publicly. Privately. My mother says I failed the family. My father won't answer my calls. Lucas disappeared." I nodded. I believed her. "They're not wrong about one thing," she continued. "I did fail. I failed you." I sat across from her. "You failed yourself first," I said. "I just happened to be standing close enough to feel it." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Not this time." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just needed you to know, I finally understand what you did." That mattered more than an apology. She stayed for 2 nights. Slept on the couch. We talked like two people who had survived the same storm from different sides. No promises. No rekindling. Just truth. On the 3rd morning, she packed her bag. "I'm leaving the city," she said. "I need to learn how to speak before silence becomes my default again." I walked her to the door. "Marissa," I said, and she turned. "I hope you do." So did I. After she left, my life moved forward in a way that felt earned. Nathan's proposal became real. Not a bailout. Not a favor. A partnership. We launched a regional infrastructure firm focused on long-term projects, bridges, public transit, water systems. No press releases. No ego. Just work that lasted longer than headlines. My father joined as a senior advisor. He never wanted a title. Just respect. One afternoon, while reviewing blueprints, he looked at me and said, "You know, walking away takes more strength than staying quiet." I smiled. "You taught me that." "No," he said gently. "I reminded you. You already knew." 6 months later, Hale Consolidated announced restructuring. Assets sold. Leadership replaced. Veronica vanished from industry panels and charity galas alike. I never heard from her again. But the story didn't end there. Because power doesn't disappear, it shifts. And one evening, as I stood on a newly finished bridge watching traffic flow smoothly beneath the city lights, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Ethan Hale," a voice asked. "No," I replied. "Just Ethan." A pause. Then, "Good. That's who we wanted." The line went quiet for half a second. "My name is Samuel Cross. I represent a group that's been watching how you handled yourself. We believe the next phase won't be quiet." I looked out at the bridge, solid, grounded, unshaken. "I'm listening," I said. And somewhere behind me, the past finally stopped chasing. The call didn't come with urgency. That's how I knew it mattered. When people want to scare you, they raise their voice. When they want to control you, they rush you. But when something is already in motion, when the outcome is inevitable, they speak calmly. Samuel Cross didn't waste words. "We've been tracking a pattern," he said. "Not just with Hale Consolidated. With families like them. Money-centered dynasties that mistake obedience for loyalty. You broke that pattern publicly." I leaned against the railing of the bridge, the night air cool against my face. Cars moved beneath me in steady lines of light, indifferent to everything that had happened behind closed doors months earlier. "And you want what?" I asked. "To see what happens next," he replied. "Not for them. For you." He explained slowly. His group funded long-term civic projects, quiet ones. Infrastructure. Education. Recovery zones. The kind of work that didn't benefit from spectacle. They didn't want figureheads. They wanted people who had already proven they wouldn't sell their spine to stay comfortable. "We don't reward obedience," Samuel said. "We reward clarity." I didn't answer right away. Because clarity cost something. Over the next weeks, doors opened that I didn't knock on. Not because of my resume, but because of my refusal. People recognized that moment at the wedding not as drama, but as a line drawn cleanly. Nathan and I expanded operations. Projects came in fast. Then faster. We hired locally. Paid fairly. Built deliberately. No shortcuts. No favors owed. My father watched it all with quiet pride. One evening, as we locked up the workshop, he asked, "Do you regret it?" I knew what he meant. "No," I said. "But I mourn who I thought they were." He nodded. "That's normal. You didn't lose people. You lost illusions." The last illusion fell when Veronica finally reached out. Not through lawyers. Not through threats. Through a single email. No subject line. Just a sentence. "You didn't win. You just embarrassed us." I read it twice. Then once more. And then I deleted it. Because victory was never the point. The real consequence arrived months later, quietly, the way real endings do. Hale Consolidated sold its flagship properties. Veronica's name disappeared from donor lists. Marissa moved overseas. Lucas faced charges tied to misallocated funds. No headlines mentioned me anymore. And that was the best part. I wasn't the story. The work was. A year later, we finished a bridge project connecting two neighborhoods that had been separated for decades. The opening ceremony was small. No speeches. No cameras. Just families crossing from one side to the other for the first time without detours. A child ran past me laughing. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I watched the video again today. I finally understand why you left." I didn't reply. Understanding doesn't require response. It requires change. That night, I stood alone at the edge of the bridge, the city breathing beneath me, and thought about the man I'd been standing at the altar, silent, hopeful, waiting for permission. He didn't disappear. He grew a backbone. I walked away from a wedding with nothing but my name. And that turned out to be enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been asked to shrink yourself to keep the peace, do me a small favor before you go. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this travel further when we carry them together.